My story started, I think about 2001 is when I realized things were starting to change. We were in ministry for sex addiction together. We founded one of the first ministries in the greater Seattle area. He's a speaker and a writer, and we had traveled some and done conferences. And right out of the gate, it was unbelievably busy. Within the first year, we were getting 1,000 phone calls and emails a month. We opened the doors at the very end of 1999. Lots and lots of stress, and almost all the calls, as you can guess, were from women. And I was the only there. I was practicing as a therapist then, on staff, the only woman. So most of those calls were in my direction, and we were working 80 hours a week. And he's a world-changing whirlwind, so it just ramped up really, really fast. Lots of stress, which you know is not good for addiction. And so really by about 2001, I could tell something was wrong, but it took, there were only men on our board of directors, and it took me 3 years to get them to require a polygraph. And by then things were a lot worse. And when he knew he had to take a polygraph, he went ahead and confessed to his sponsor. And it cataclysmically altered our world immediately. He was no longer working there. So we lost an income. And of course, I kind of fell apart like we all do. Everything changed. Our board asked him to move out to allow me to have space and time to heal. He made progress. I invited him home. I had to leave our nonprofit as well. So early in our healing, we were both unemployed. Scary times, and kind of a public disgrace. Our entire database knew, and all of our contacts in the greater Seattle area knew. And I had started, he was running a huge SA meeting as part of the ministry, and I had launched a S-Anon meeting. That's all there was back then. And it grew quite large as well, this big circle every week, huge circle. And I would watch as women in the group cried. And that was when I realized there was more. You know, we weren't all just codependents. But it took me a while to find help because everybody knew me. There weren't very many practitioners back then. Everybody I was a co-addict. The marriage ultimately fell apart and ended, and our home was sold. So I was out of a job, the house was gone, and I was seeing clients in our living room at that point, since we were no longer with the nonprofit. And my health had just completely collapsed, and he was gone. So really, I had to change directions. And part of my reaction was really bad inflammation. My joints were all swollen. I couldn't keyboard. I was wearing wrist braces. My son lives in Brazil. It was summer down there in the middle of the winter in the dry, wet, or cold, wet Northwest. So I went to Brazil for 5 months, even thinking maybe I'd stay there, learn the language and stay there. It was warm. I had started a website trying to launch out on my own. So there in Brazil in my little apartment, I kept pecking away at that. I started to get better physically, and 5 months later, I decided to go back to Seattle. But another health challenge, it caused me to black out all the time, and my family didn't want me to live alone. So I ended up spending 2 years in my sister's basement trying to work and carry on. And ultimately, I moved to San Diego briefly, couldn't afford it, and then moved to Mazatlan, Mexico. And I think I think that's really where my healing started, really, really started, because it was different. I was away from the stress of bumping into people who knew. The weather was different and the beach was beautiful and the culture was different and it was a lot cheaper, so I could work and still enjoy life. And that was a huge shift in my healing. And during all that time, Barb did her study and wrote to me and asked me if I was interested. And eventually the book came out of that. So by then my heart was healed and I knew God had a purpose for me. And I wasn't done because my husband was gone.
Yeah. Appreciate you sharing part of your story with us. One of the things that is so important as we're going through, the shock of discovering this stuff is that we have support. And like you were saying, back then there really wasn't much. So I want to ask if you could share with us what it was like from your vantage point 20 years ago in our field before the study came out. What were you seeing in the sex addiction world for partners?
I think Doug Weiss was the only one who had a workbook out, and it was 12-step based. It was looking at us as if we're codependent. So to me, that wasn't helpful. And when I was working before I left my marriage, before everything fell apart, in that large circle, when I would see those women cry every week who were recently grieved, I realized somebody needed to write something for them. So I wrote my first workbook in 2001, and I started pulling those women out and doing small groups with them so that they could get enough healing under their belt that they could go back into the S-Anon and the depth and the help that does lie in the 12 steps, and use that to help them keep going. Of course, it wasn't enough. I didn't know that then. But to answer your question, I was thinking about that today, and it's like comparing the moon to the earth. Back then, it was the moon. And now to me, there is so much help. Women are so lucky. And I'm always shocked to hear them say, I can't find any help, because there are a bazillion of you out there doing this now. And it really wasn't until I think 2006 is when Barb emailed me to tell me about her study. And it was just a small group of women she had worked with, but she knew what she was seeing was pain and trauma. And like me, with that large group of women, there needed to be something else. So she did this study, and she had gotten her doctorate specifically so she could do a study that would be noteworthy, so people would allow it and read it. And so I read it, and I really didn't have enough healing under my belt then, and my health was still a challenge. So I put it off, and then in 2007 or 8, I emailed her and asked her if she was still interested in doing something with that. And ultimately, we used it to write the book. And there was no research on partners other than her little study, so nobody knew how to help them. And so I spent a year researching trauma and came across the label relationship trauma. And that was as close as I could find in the literature to betrayal trauma. But honestly, I used the tools that the forerunners of the trauma field used and tried to incorporate those, turn them into ours that we could apply towards us. Slowly, as you know, Hope, it's changed over time. It's still not 100% of practitioners, but we're getting there. We're getting closer.
Mm-hmm. And you have been actively working with partners then for all of these years. So I'm I'm curious if you could share with us, what would you say are 2 or 3 things that you see consistently helps partners heal? What are a couple things that really make the difference?
Okay, I think the two absolute essential pieces women have to have if they're going to move through it and come out the other side and go on to thrive with or without the man in their life is they have to, what we call in psychobabble differentiation. They have to recognize that they are a unique, in my worldview, God created individual who was gifted with talents, who has so much to offer the world, a story of her own. She has value. She has value outside of her marriage. And for my generation, that was a brand new thought. My mother told me the only degree I needed was an MRS degree. And so, that was the way I was raised. I got married at 18 the first time and didn't go to college till later in life. But if I can help women understand, that they are valuable, their story's valuable, that they are unique, they have so much to offer the world. Yes, they're a wife and almost always a mother, but they're more. Their kids are going to grow up, and help them grasp onto that they're a treasure, and in differentiating, to learn boundaries so that they can begin to draw the parameters. They can identify and then draw the parameters with their husband, what they're willing to live with and what they're not willing to live with, and to give them a hard, firm, loving choice. And that's what Karen Scotland finally had the guts to do. And her husband, Charles, told me it made all the difference. He did not want to lose her. And he knew that if he didn't, he was going to. So he got into recovery. So those two things. And then there's this joy component. I'd love to share if we have time later. But it's been the single most influential piece in my going on to really thrive and to be able to keep my joy cup full every day. It's something that's why I'm called the circle of joy. That's why the workbook ends with the word joy, and my team is totally in love with, and Jody especially, and Catherine, that concept. And I think it's so important so that women not only can realize they're a unique, valuable human being with gifts to offer the world, and they actually have an obligation, to develop that and use it and gift the world with it. And then to learn how to keep their joy cups full, because life, as you know, isn't always a bowl of cherries. So being able to keep our joy cup full, no matter what, is essential.
Mm-hmm. So was there more you would share with us about this joy cup you're talking about?
I came across, I unpacking for the little while I was in San Diego, unpacking, I found a little book that I don't remember ever seeing before. I didn't buy it. I don't know where I got it. It's almost like God put it in that box because I needed it. But it was the first book, this counseling practice that was then based in Pasadena, California, wrote. They worked with addiction and they worked with betrayal. And all of them, I think there were 5, used the same structure in their work with clients. And the long and the short of it is that we need support, we need to connect, and we need to learn how to keep our joy cups full. They didn't say it in that language back then, but that's what I got from it. And it really changed the way I work with clients, and it changed the way I live my life. So I actually have a red mug. I was going to bring it out and I forgot, that has a heart in white, and inside it says empowered by joy. And I have a joy pillow on my sofa, and I have little joys all over my house or my apartment in one of my decor colors. It's just a reminder to me that it's hard to forget, because I feel when I'm getting empty, so I'll do it. But they're reminders to take a moment and take time out and refill my joy cup.
So that sounds like one of the essentials. But if you could give an essential tidbit to a partner, what is a wisdom nugget that you find yourself saying a lot to clients, or over the years has really proven true and helpful for women? Do you have a wisdom nugget or two you could share with the partners?
I think it would be just to help them recognize how special they are, how unique they are, how gifted they are, how much they have to offer the world. And then I always teach them how to keep their joy cups full, whether they're men or women. I really play that string on my guitar.
So when you're talking about keeping the joy cup full, do you ever hear women kind of counteract that and say, but I'm hurting. I'm in so much pain right now. How can there be room for joy?
We build it in from the beginning. It's hope. And with the counseling practice that was in Pasadena then, that now just writes and speaks and trains, what they found is in that support, they found that with the people they worked with, whether they were addicts or trauma victims, even though they used the exact same approach, those that healed, they tried to isolate that. They looked at all their notes. Those that healed had support outside of therapy. They had meaningful connections. And that is the source of our joy, really, is meaningful connections with other human beings where we can connect at a heart level. So I'm not married, I don't have a boyfriend, I don't want a boyfriend, but living in Mexico, I go out every couple of mornings and buy fresh produce. Part of my health regimen is being a raw vegan. So I go through beaucoup produce, and I just live my life now so that I'm in my connection is, my beings are out there, and I always try to connect with as many human beings as I can. And it's amazing how even walking, I live on a lake here, and there's a big Malecone, and everybody congregates on the Malecone, but real early in the morning, there are a lot of people who exercise down there, and it's still kind of dark. And everybody, you can, if you say Buenos dias and smile, they all respond. So this is the way I live my life, and it's the way I keep my joy cup full. And then I use other things like praise music and, the things I enjoy, walking and being in nature.
I'm curious if you could share with us what is welling up in your heart and mind when you are walking through the market and buying your fresh produce and letting your beams out of you. What are you learning these days?
Well, I think in a way this might be the nuggets you were looking for. I think the three things I want every single woman to know, and men, I work with men now quite a bit and with couples, but as women, it's up to us to secure our futures. I think the one thing we all learn on this journey is we really can't count for sure on anyone else. And I think it's really important that a part of that differentiation is that we find a way to make sure that no matter what happens, we could trust our husbands, we invest in our husbands, but in the very end, we've learned the hard way that they might not always be there. And so that's one. The second one is that relationships are the most important thing in life. when it all comes down to the last few moments, I had a heart attack in lying on I was supposed to just have a cath scan where they stick tubes up through you and look at your heart and your blood vessels. But I was laying there and there was a team, making sure they could save my life, and I had a heart attack. And I wasn't sure if they'd make it in time. They had to put 5 stents in as they did angioplasty, so it took time. The doctor called my son in Brazil in the middle of the night while he was doing it. And so just laying there, I'm faith-based, so I was talking to God, and I knew I wasn't alone. And I knew that no matter how it came out, I was going to be happy and I was going to be okay. And laying there, again, I was reminded relationships are the most important thing in life. So again, when we lose the one that's the very, very center of our lives, it's important that we know how to keep our joy cups full so that we can heal. And then I know that not everybody believes the way I do, so I don't want to stress that too much, but I think in the very end, we all need faith of some kind, because experiencing those moments alone, was my family, the people I love, the women I've met, and the knowing that I wasn't alone and that I was going to be okay no matter what. That really, really, to me, are on my deathbed, those are the things I want people to know.
I think people might be taken aback when they hear how recent this heart attack was. Are you interested in sharing when that happened?
Well, I was in heart failure for 1.5 years. My father's first major coronary and triple bypass, he was only 42. And both of his parents died fairly early. And there's my grandpa in his late 50s, my grandma at 60. So, I come by it naturally, but one of the, I suppose it's a response to the trauma in my life. I had I still have it, it's in remission, an autoimmune disorder called pemphigoid, causes blisters all over your entire body. And it was in my mouth and up my nose and got a couple on my eye. It's very unpleasant. And they have to get it stopped because if it gets too bad, it'll kill you and you bleed and you can't wear clothes and you stick to your sheets. But the drugs they use are deadly. And it took me quite a while to get off of them. And it further damaged my heart. So, I've been expecting it. I've been medication for a long time. I'd already had a stent on my widowmaker artery, was in heart failure. And then in March, on a Friday afternoon, late Friday afternoon, I could tell I was in more trouble and started trying to get help. And it literally took me 30 hours to get help and 4 taxi rides and 3 hospitals. And finally found the doctor that I had already worked with and met, and he's the one that saved my life. But yeah, I feel very, very blessed to get another chance and lots to do in the time I have left.
Is there a takeaway that you think women can really get from the study you're doing with all these marriages about how they're healing or not healing?
Yes, I asked, I think, 5 specific questions. The study was, what has your husband done to help you heal? And in tabulating the answers and really, really spending time with them, fascinatingly, 30% of the marriages are really healing. They're doing well. They're either really, really good, or the wife is so encouraged he's really working. She knows he's going to get all the way to where she needs him to be. So I thought that was great. But these are women who, who are following me. I know they've probably had help like you have. So I think that's really important that we get the help we need. But 33%, that was pretty good. But then almost that many, a huge middle section of women were still married, but they were miserable. Either their husband hasn't done any recovery, or he's done recovery well. One of them had even started a group for other men, but they haven't done anything to meet their wife's emotional need. They're intimacy anorexic, and that's where I'm focused in my work right now. That's the workbook I'm writing for men. I'm working with a group of men right now, taking them through that material. So that's a huge need that was there in the center. And then the other category was marriages that ended, but the women just didn't want to do it anymore because it was so bad. They knew better. They got themselves out of Dodge. But another study I did this last spring was on health consequences. And fascinatingly, the women who didn't have, there weren't very many. I mean, there were like 3 or 4 who didn't have any health consequences. They left. Their husbands didn't get right into recovery. They drew the boundary that no recovery followed. So they left. And basically they saved themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such important work that you're doing to really outline and define what is it that's going right, because there has to be patterns there.
There are.
And yes. And then what is it that's going wrong is also part of what you're discovering. And so this is going to be so important as women continue taking this survey. And I can't encourage you all enough to go to acircleofjoy.com and go be part of the survey.
Like, how far do I go to to like hold his hand and like, this is how you can help me? Or how much do I just stand back and say, I want to feel this and you figure it out?
It's interesting. I used to think they should be able to read our minds too, but they can't. And a part of boundaries is, and what I like to incorporate in with boundaries is figuring out what we need, and then finding our voice and speaking, asking for it. We can't expect others to read our minds. And I have husbands who are just desperate to save their marriages. One couple in particular I'm working with right now, he did a group with me. She did a group with me 6 years ago. She's put up with sobriety, but not the other stuff. And this man, he weeps. He's desperate to save his marriage, but it's only because she's finally empowered enough. And then I'm asking her nosy questions every week on Zoom in front of him so that he gets to hear the answers. You might even think some of them are brain dead, but unless they've read enough material, unless they've watched enough things like, this, where they get to learn and understand what we need, they really aren't. And I suggest you have them read a book. I've had clients who ask their husband to read Your Sexually Addicted Spouse, or now they're asking for others that are out there by other authors. But our husbands don't know. We need to let them know what we need in order to heal. And then in the moment, we need to ask if they would mind meeting our needs. Part of boundaries is accepting the no's that we get, and then figuring out how to meet our own, fill our joy cup on our own. Maybe he just wanted to swim for a few minutes, but I would have let him know. I would love it if you come and sit with me. I need that. I need that time together. And I don't know about you, but being on the beach with a man after going through betrayal, I would need that extra bad just to know that I was the object of his attention.
So it's hard to not feel like it's still robbing our family and our relationship. And how do I either manage or let go of those feelings and not let it rob the joy?
That's a really tough one, especially this early in betrayal when everything's kind of well, I don't know about you, but 2 years in, even though I was alone, I'd been away from it, I wasn't healed yet. So my guess is this early, that's hard. It's something I hear a lot. And I have one man right now who's gone 6 nights a week, either in therapy or at a meeting. He's in a very early recovery and needs to be, but it's hard. And I hear you, the soccer games and, you know, the dinner and dishes and kids and homework and putting kids to bed. I hear it every time I meet with a woman who's early in recovery. I think we have to examine, what am I willing to live with? This is one of the costs of the addiction. It might go down to 1 time a week, you know, in the next 2 or 3, 4 years, but he really does need a meeting for the rest of his life, whatever time of day that is. He needs at least 1 a week. My husband's an example of how important it is to keep recovery strong, but it has a price. It costs us a lot. It costs many women vacations on the beach, which they absolutely love. It costs all kinds of stuff. One woman, her husband had an affair with her sister, so it costs people family relations. Is he worth it? That's a hard question. It's a brazen question, but I do think it's something we all have to answer. It's part of the price of loving an addict. He's betrayed you. You have the quote unquote right to leave. Would you leave over that? Only you can answer that. Quality time when you are together. I find that the American schedule is so full, and it's part of what I love about Mexico. You know, there aren't soccer meets 5 nights a week. Kids aren't running here, there, and everywhere. So families spend all day Sunday together, and it's tough because you're in the American lifestyle. But prioritizing our time, our obligations. I literally, gave my kids choices. They could have like 2 things that they were involved in. My first husband, their father wasn't a sex addict as far as I know, but families need time. And so that's a hard question, but I think you have to answer it for yourself. Is he worth it? Mm-hmm. Is the relationship worth it? And I would just throw in that with the percentages we're seeing in today's studies of people who struggle with pornography, at least, it's getting pretty darn close to 100%. And I've heard college students say they don't have one friend, male or female, who doesn't use pornography. So if we let go of one that has learned and is sober and is committed to us and to our family and to his sobriety, I think we have to weigh that in the balance. Do you want to risk with a new man who isn't yet aware of the damage he can do? When you hear us say it's not about you, I used to hate hearing that, but honestly and truly, it is not about us. It's about a hole in them. And one of the reasons that so many of them have intimacy anorexia, most of our husbands are wounded little boys walking around in grown-up bodies. And soon as I ask a man for his childhood story, in almost every single case, there's either severe trauma, lack of attachment, lack of bonding. Parents didn't know how because they didn't learn it as they were raised. And sometimes it's like outright multiple times of sex abuse. Or else, like in my former husband's case, it's just he was lacking the father blessing, and it really damaged him, and he knew it. He used to do workshops on that topic. He called it manhood without models. If they don't get that acknowledgement that they're a whole valuable human being, that that they're this gift, that there's so much potential, that we delight in you, we believe in you, that fills that intimacy void, that connection void, and then teaches them how to connect with us and our children. It's my former husband used to say, it's like a man walking around with his umbilical cord looking for a place to connect it. And we were created for relationship, and we were designed with an intimacy, a need for intimacy. And if we don't know how to meet that need, fill that void with relationships, meaningful relationships, where we have these connections, these joy producers, then it doesn't mean the intimacy need doesn't go away. It just means we don't know how to fill it. And most boys discover pornography early, and I was molested. My response was to be promiscuous. My response now, I see, for several years, especially in my teens, I was a sex addict, and I had discovered porn and males, and it felt good. When they look at the picture, it lights up the same part of the brain that sex does, that joy does, that void for an instant gets filled. No, it doesn't meet that deep longing. No, there's no relationship that fills that void. But in that moment, the brain registers it the same. And like Pat, he's always looking for female approval, because he was. I'm assuming he's not now. He did lots of therapy. He's a therapist now, and he's remarried. But then, I saw it. Yeah, you could see it. Even though he knew what it was about, he spoke on it. There was that insatiable need to know that he was enough, and only Dad could have filled that void. But the opposite sex's attention, and I can vouch for that myself, I was bonded with, but the sex abuse started early, and it was a part of my early childhood for several years. I learned to get male approval by being sexual. So they're set up for it.
Mhm.
And it needs to be a part of their healing, so that there's that the whole person, the little wounded little boy, gets dealt with, and so that he learns how to connect with you and people in a healthy way outside of marriage. It's not about you. And if he can do everything he needs to do, he can do this. He can get all the way there. And I have had clients, a couple, it's probably been 25 years now since she did a group, and they went all the way through everything, and they went all through the way through this life model and joy stuff, and they now do groups on that whole thesis. But I've met them, and they're happy, and it's a different lifetime for them. They're retired now, they're older, but they're in a completely different place than they were. And you can be too. And I just want to say thank you to all of you. I treasure, that is really what's in my huge joy container that I'm going to take out of this life with me, is all these wonderful relationships and heart connections over the years. So I value each of you.